And we're now joined by Tindig Pilipinas co-convenor Kiko Aquino Dee to talk more about the impeachment complaints against Vice President Sara Duterte. Good morning, Kiko. Thanks for being back here on Morning Matters.
Hi, good morning, Pauline. Good morning to everyone watching us today.
All right. Well, before we go to the impeachment complaints against Vice President Sara Duterte, I wanted to go back briefly on the events that took place last week. What's your assessment on how the House Justice Committee tackled, discussed, and eventually dismissed the complaints against President Bongbong Marcos?
Well, I think there's good and bad. No? The good is that I'm glad that the House acted very soon after receiving the impeachment complaints against President Marcos. That's a big contrast from what the 19th Congress did, where we waited, I think, more than 2 months before the first, our impeachment complaint against VP Sara Duterte was discussed, and it was just archived and then brought to the Senate. So I think that's an improvement. However, I have questions about the basis for the vote on sufficiency and substance, because as I understand it, the standard for sufficiency and substance is simply that the allegations on the impeachment complaint do actually constitute grounds for impeachment. But the discussion in the House Justice Committee had to do more with asking for evidence that there wasn't really an opportunity to present from the side of President Marcos or from the side of the complainant. So that I think is quite suspect. I don't think that it should have been tossed out on the grounds of insufficiency of merit. So I think mixed bag po yung nangyari last week.
Well, Congresswoman Jervely Wistro did say that technically the impeachment process or proceedings against the president isn't dead yet because the committee report will still be voted upon on plenary. But realistically speaking, do you see that being overturned in plenary, or is that a long shot?
Well, I haven't sat down to do the sort of political math on the House plenary, how they vote on impeachment. So I don't want to speculate on that too much. But I'll just echo what Representative Luistro said, that there is an opportunity for for the case to be reopened. Basically, if the House plenary feels, as I think many people do, that a lot of questions remain as far as the president's role in the flood control scam is concerned, as far as the allegations of Zaldico that we'd like to interrogate a bit more. So, I'd leave that to the conscience of our congressman.
Well, you did say, Kiko, that there are pros and cons when it came to how the committee tackled this impeachment of President Bongbong Marcos. There were things that you believe are suspect, but with all that said, how are these takeaways shaping your expectations going into the impeachment process against Vice President Sara Duterte?
So I think for the most part, while I do question the steps that were taken as far as what the basis for sufficiency and substance is concerned, I do think that even if that were applied to our impeachment complaint, we attached, we have an 855-page complaint, and about 50 of it is the complaint, and then the 800 pages or so are evidence that was gathered over the course of several years. We've been open about saying that we based the complaint on the version that was elevated to the Senate by the House of Representatives. So these are things that many of our representatives have seen before, right? And they endorsed it to the Senate prior. So I think if it gets to the point that even just at the stage of sufficiency and form, evidence is sought after, we have several annexes that our members of the House the members of the Justice Committee specifically, can refer to. And if having established that the complaint is sufficient in form, we look forward to hearing the side of President Sara Duterte so that, again, as she's been saying, she can be given a proper venue to answer these allegations against her.
Wow, 855 pages for this complaint. That's a lengthy one, Kiko. But first, I wanted to go back to when you filed this complaint, because a lot of people were surprised that you filed this earlier than February 6th. And I know that's because the Supreme Court, in its latest resolution, appeared to have redefined what a session day means. But are you concerned at all that this may affect your complaint based on technicalities?
Well, I think I do grant the Supreme Court is a bit unpredictable, no. But really, what we're standing on is that they made their decision on the motions for reconsideration 2 Thursdays ago. I forget the exact date that was, but and on the basis of the text there with the redefinition of session days, our calculation is that we could have filed as early as January 15 if the decision had come out sooner. In fact. So, and given that that decision is said to be final and executory, I think that that's the interpretation that we went with. That the definition of session days allows us to file at this point, and I think it's very important to again underscore the urgency that these questions need to be answered since they've been asked. They've been being asked since 2024, and second, we also wanted to we wanted to avoid a situation similar to what we perceived to be happening with the complaint of President Marcos, where a first impeachment complaint was filed with sort of questionably with questionable content in terms of how serious it was about getting an impeachment complaint across. So it was important for us to make sure that we file a complaint that at least we could stand behind. No?
Well, House Secretary General Cheloy Garafil already confirmed that this has been transmitted already to the Office of the Speaker officially last Thursday afternoon. But as you mentioned, Kiko, no, it's the same articles. You have 5 articles of impeachment for this complaint. But what makes this stronger compared to the last one filed? And what makes it different this time around? Because as we mentioned, many of the allegations are still the same. Although I believe you already added this time the testimony from Mil Madriaga. And I wanted to ask, how airtight is this complaint, considering that you were also in a race against time to file a sound complaint before any weak or bogus ones were filed before the House? So how long have you been preparing for this, and how airtight is it?
So once again, though, the date of February 6 came out July of last year, and we've been even in interviews right after the complaint happened, we've been talking about, while we're going to file this motion for reconsideration, one among other groups on the Supreme Court decision, we also were preparing for the February 6th date for quite some time. In terms of what we expect to happen, or in terms of how confident we are, again, we went through the version that was filed by the House of Representatives, or elevated by the House of Representatives, with a fine-tooth comb. We ended up with 5 articles rather than the 7 that they originally filed, because we felt that these 5, the first 5 specifically, were the ones that had the most substance as far as being related to the grounds for impeachment are concerned. And then lastly, I think it's important to emphasize that while the idea that there's nothing new is being thrown around, it's important to note that the Supreme Court didn't say anything about the content of the impeachment complaint. What they talked about was the process that the House of Representatives used. And while we might have disagreements about whether the Supreme Court made the right decision or not, what I think everyone has agreed, or what nobody has said so far, is that the content of the first few impeachment complaints were problematic, right? So I am confident that this complaint will be airtight, sufficient form, sufficient substance. The probable cause will be found from there. And if the basis of all of this is just the facts, I'm confident in the case. But again, as far as political considerations are concerned, that's up to the consciences of our representatives.
And that's one thing the Supreme Court did clarify. They did not absolve the Vice President from anything. They didn't really rule on the merits. It was more on the process. But Kiko, as we know, there are 2 impeachment complaints officially lodged now before the House against the Vice President. Is there anything different with this complaint filed by the Makabayan bloc in terms of strategy, in terms of facts, as compared to yours?
I don't want to speak for the other complainants, no, although I don't doubt the motivations behind them. I think we're one and the same as far as wanting to get to the bottom of the controversies behind Vice President Sara Duterte. I think the difference is our complaint has additional articles in terms of the grave threats that the Vice President made against the President, against the President, the First Lady, and the Speaker of the House. We also have certain articles pertaining to her sal-ends and undeclared wealth. So I think ours is a bit more expansive compared to the Makabayan bloc, but by and large, I think they're we're rowing down the same river. No, we're rowing down the same stream.
Well, one of the article does accuse the vice president of betrayal of public trust over her alleged misuse of the confidential funds, 612.5 million pesos. This also includes the fabrication of those alleged acknowledgement receipts, the questionable infamous names, Mary Grace Piatos, Miggy Mango. But what level of verification have you done here, Kiko? Will this be able to withstand the scrutiny of the members of the committee?
Again, I think these are what came up. These are the things that came up in the House Quadcom. A lot of these statements were given under oath. And again, what we expect is that these can finally be addressed, whether it's in the House Justice Committee or whether it's in the Senate, if the House chooses to elevate it to the Senate using the fast track mode of impeachment. But I think, given what we have so far, the state of evidence or the state of knowledge is that there are some very, very serious anomalies about the way that these confidential funds were spent. And again, what's important is that the vice president is being given an opportunity to clarify these cases. No, if that wasn't done in the House hearings, on the hearings of the budget, on the hearings on her offices, then this can be done at this venue. And again, I think while what we see, there's, in my mind, not too much room for interpretation as far as there was somehow no wrongdoing here. We're still open to listen to the side of the vice president. If she's able to put out a convincing narrative that explains that these funds that went to very unserious names and aliases, for lack of a better term, if these funds went to important places, then I think that's something we will take in stride as well.
But one major new development here, Kiko, is the sworn affidavit of alleged whistleblower Ramil Madriaga. But the question is, how credible is Mr. Madriaga?
So I think the two things that have us convinced about his credibility, or well, three things, I guess. One is the fact that he made a sworn affidavit. This is different from the other pieces of hearsay that we've heard in other cases. So that sort of gives it a higher level of credibility. Second is, again, he's implicating himself in a way. He's unlike other sort of people we've heard testify before that said that we know this for certain, but we had nothing to do with it. No, so I understand that sort of statements made counter to one's self-interest are given additional legal weight because, or given additional sort of, are seen with more credibility in the eyes of the court because, again, these are things that, why would you say these things that hurt yourself if they're not true? And then I think the third point is that a lot of the narratives that emerged from Ramil Madriaga's statements correspond to what we have heard about the confidential and intelligence funds, about the alleged bribery and the DepEd. So, but that being said, I think it's also important that this testimony, even though it's a sworn affidavit, be scrutinized. And again, the venue for this is the House Justice Committee, or again, if it's fast-tracked, then the venue for this will be the Senate. So again, we look forward to to scrutinizing more what si Ramil Madriaga said.
But would you know, Kiko, if he's willing to testify before the House if this does reach the hearing stage? I know his lawyer already said that he might be willing to appear if he was subpoenaed. But are you in talks with Ramil Madriaga?
Not me personally, although I'll have to check if others in my group are. But I did note that statement of his lawyer, and that's something that we hope does come to pass. And I think it's very important that he defend his statements in the proper venue, the same way that we're giving Vice President Sara Duterte that opportunity to defend her own narrative of events in the proper court or in the proper venue, which is the House Justice Committee.
But on the part of the vice president, she's calling this as politicking, as harassment, as a fishing expedition. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I've been saying, I think since last year, especially in the aftermath of the 2025 senatorial elections, that the endorsement power of Vice President Duterte and her whole family is quite powerful. No? So in my mind, whether she's convicted or not, and whether she's disqualified from running for office, whoever the candidate of the Duterte bloc, the Duterte faction is, will be a very, very strong contender, no? And whether that's Vice President Sara Duterte or someone else. And so, in my mind, this impeachment process, regardless of result, won't have a huge impact on the 2028 election. As far as the goal of turning our backs on the Marcos Duterte unity team is concerned. No? So regardless of what happens to Vice President Sara Duterte, there has to be preparations made to make a compelling case to the people that we need to turn our backs on this failed politics, which has given birth to Mary Grace Piatos, which has given birth to the flood control scam, which has given birth to all of these problems we're facing now. But again, that's a different avenue. That's a different aspect of accountability. Impeachment is the legal side of accountability. That's important to pursue. The election is a political side of accountability. That's also important to pursue. But at least in my view, in this particular case, they don't really interact that much. They're two separate fights that need to be waged equally.
Up at last year, Kiko, so 215 lawmakers did sign that fourth complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte. And just recently, Congressman Terry Redon did not discount the possibility that this route may or may not be taken once again, and the complaints could even be included in the order of business as early as today for plenary action. But realistically, do you see that happening? Do you see any signs that members could utilize this so-called express route again? Or do you think they won't be able to garner enough support, enough signatures this time around?
I have to say I'm a bit of a neophyte in terms of the bean counting in the House of Representatives. No? So I can't speak to... I'm not good at reading those tea leaves quite yet. No? What I will say is that I think, as far as I'm concerned, whether the route chosen is through the Justice Committee or the route chosen is through the fast track, what's most important to us is that the evidence is presented. And to us, it makes not that much of a difference in terms of whether that is presented in the House Justice Committee or that evidence is presented in the Senate. Honestly, if I had to sort of pick a preferred route, actually, because it is the second route, the fast track, the fast break, 1/3 votes of the plenary, automatic vote to Senate route. That was the one that the Supreme Court introduced so many new rules to. I do think that it might be more prudent to pursue the first route, just because it was the one that wasn't touched by the Supreme Court's judicial legislation. This is the one that works more closely to, I think, how it was envisioned by our Constitution. So I think there's merit to that, but again, I leave that to the discernment of the House to decide what the most prudent way to get the evidence out is. To me, in the end, whether that's in the House Justice Committee or in the Senate, that's the most important thing.
Well, we will continue monitoring that. But before we let you go, Kiko, if I could just ask you, how are you preparing for February 25? It is the 40th anniversary of the People Power Revolution. Can we expect another large-scale rally? And of course, what's your assessment on the flood control investigations?
Those are two big questions to us for a parting shot. No? In terms of a large-scale rally, I think we'll announce when we're ready to announce, and I think we can expect to announce something within the week. But definitely, Feb 25 is a date that we've all been looking at since last year. So definitely, there's definitely preparations being made in that account. In terms of the flood control scam, again, while I will say there is some credit to be given that it looks like some big fish are about to be served warrants, no, in terms of sitting incumbent senators to me do constitute big fish. But again, I think there are certain people that are kind of getting away without their names being mentioned, right? I think a bunch of us saw that picture of Speaker Martin Romualdez being welcomed with open arms in the House plenary, and that made me not feel very good in terms of to put it mildly. No, so while we should recognize that there is some progress being made and we should give that credit, I don't think that it's anywhere near where the public expects, where no matter how close you are to the powers that be, whether that be Marcos or Duterte, we should see heads roll for the massive corruption, the unprecedented corruption that we've seen in the last few months, in the last few years.
All right, well, we're going to leave that there for now. Thank you very much, as always, for sharing your insights with us. That was Tindig Pilipinas co-convenor, Kiko Aquino Dee.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much for everyone who listened to us today.